Hey everybody, good morning. It's the Frustrated Programmer. It's about 5:30 in the morning and I don't feel like turning on my light, so I'm not. You're just gonna have to deal with the grainy, awful image that you have. But I'm gonna be sharing my screen anyway. Alright, so we'll just get down to it. And I'll share the screen. Here we go. There you go. Alright, we're back in my blackjack simulation. And today we want to, as you can see, I just have one CMakeList here in the root of the directory, and I want them everywhere because apparently that's a good thing to do. It makes your project more portable because you can just take a certain folder and a couple lines from your root CMakeList and move them over to a new project, which will be my goal when I develop this further into a program that teaches you how to count cards. So, where to begin? I was doing some reading earlier, and apparently all you have to do is create a CMakeList as if it was a root directory in whatever your next directory is, and then in your root folder, or your root CMakeLists, make a line that says include subdirectory blah blah blah. So I guess we're going to try it out. Right now I just have a we'll look in my source folder, and you'll see that I hold both my header files, the .h, and the actual programming files, the CPPs. The implementations and the interfaces are both in the same folder. Now, I don't know why this would be a bad idea, but I see some other directories or some other projects, they separate them into an include folder and a source folder. And I think actually your Linux distributions will probably do the same thing. If you go to your, see we have a source folder and an include folder. I don't know why they're separated. So I guess I'll look that up. How do I switch my windows? I forget. Oh, right. Okay. If you're curious, I'm using the i3 window manager or window manager. It's really nice. I don't have to use my tiny little trackpad on the Lenovo X201 ThinkPad or the frickin', what do you call them? The I don't know what to call it. It reminds me of a nipple. Anyway, it sucks. So let's look that up. Why separate eggs, colors, laundry, this light from the next? Source and include. Mostly Unix, Linux style C++ development. I see that many C++ libraries store their header files in an include folder and source files in a source folder. For the sake of conformance, I adopted this in my own code, but it's not clear to me whether this should be done for application code as well. I've seen a few cases where a flat directory structure is used for that. What would be the recommended approach? Patrick says, I also separate them. Granted, this was written in 2010, but I take it that it's applicable 5 years later. I also separate them, but not strictly on the extension, but on the access to the file. Suppose you have a module that manages customer information and uses two classes to do this. Customer validity checker. You should have used and, but whatever. Also, suppose that other parts in your application only need to know about the customer class, and that the customer validity checker is only used by the customer class to perform some checking. Based on these assumptions, I store the files like this. Public folder or include folder is customer.h. Private folder is customer.cpp, customer validity checker, customer validity checker CPV. That way it becomes immediately clear for callers of your module which parts are accessible and which parts are not. That's an interesting idea. I've used this style at one point in my previous jobs as well. I found the public-private separation a bit burdensome, but it definitely makes sense if you want to separate your API in a public part for your customers and a private part for internal use. Plus one, I use the very same separation at work. When you interact daily with at least a dozen components, it comes handy that they don't clog the API files that you don't care about. I see. All right, I see those benefits. Let's see what else. We have a build system that auto-generates our makefiles. Well, that sounds like CMake, which would not have been very popular 5 years ago. One thing it does is recursively descend in any subdirectories and build them as libraries, linking them together with the main directory's objects to make the application. Libraries are static unless the directory name ends in .so. One thing that's nice about this is that a full build of our system, which has many executables, doesn't have to repeatedly compile the common libraries. I have also taken that approach. If we look back in the terminal, we'll go back to the folder we were just, and that's a cool trick, I'll point that out. CD minus takes you back to whatever the previous directory you were in was. So if I do it again, it should take me back to user, and do it again, takes me back to something I thought is pretty useful. It's extremely useful, actually. Okay, so if we go back up and we take a look at our CMake file, we'll do it with Emacs so that you have a nice color coding. Otherwise, I would just do it in cat. All right, these are all flags here. Why don't I put some comments to recognize this? Flags. Targets. Libraries. Excuse me. Okay, here we go. Actually, I'm going to put two new lines, because other times I want to use a new line just to separate. So these are all, and it doesn't matter, I'm going to end up tearing this thing apart when I turn it into a bunch of them anyway. Okay, so libraries. What was I doing? Oh, I was showing you that I turn them into libraries first and I link everything. Add library game mechanics is our source files, which is all my objects like a single card, a deck of cards, a hand of cards, and then some of the functions that I use. So choice makes the choice depending on the given circumstances, what the dealer has and what's in your hand. And game rules all of the flow of the game, right? Tells it how to deal, how to receive an option, how to give an option, receive a result, get the result, whatever. And test files is just all of our unit tests. Right now I have that separated into test data and test and the main tests. Test data has all of the objects that I use in test to run the tests on. That needs to be separated because I want my unit tests separated by objects. So I'll do that later. But anyway, you have the library with all the game mechanics. and then I build the main simulation executable, and I link that with the library I made with game mechanics from these source files up here. All that. And down here, I actually could turn test files into a library like I did up here, but I haven't done that yet because I knew I was going to tear this thing apart. And actually, this should be a new section called unit testing. Okay. And these should be external libraries. Okay, save it, exit, go back, read what else it has to say. Okay, however, as a result of this, there's no separation of headers and sources, and it has never been a problem. Honestly, I think it's better this way because headers and source files have commonality of location, and you can grab a directory and know you got everything you need to use it. That's also true. It also works great with Subversion's externals features. Well, I don't use Subversion. And Git, I use Git, and I don't think this applies to Git. One last place where include source separation fails is if you use any code generators. I have no idea what either of these are. Flex, Bison, or Gingetops. Gingetops. Figuring out where these tools should put their outputs so they build is tricky if you spread things out. All right, so we have the top two responses are differing opinions. A lot depends on the size of the project involved. Up to a dozen or so files, keep them in one directory tends to be more convenient. Hundreds or thousands of files, holy shit. Well, I guess that must not be uncommon, but it's not on my level. You start to look for ways to separate them. So it seems to be more beneficial for library developers rather than application developers. I think it makes the folder less cluttered. Files are easier to find in my integrated development editor. Is that what IDD stands for? I think it is. Oh, environment. Duh. It makes sense to separate them for shared libraries because they may be distributed in a compiled form without the source. I have seen projects that separate out public headers while leaving private headers and source files in the same directory. That's what the first guy was talking about. I think it's good to use a consistent approach whether you're writing shared library or application level code, because you never know when you may want to turn something that you've written at the application level into a lower level library that is shared by multiple projects. Wow, this guy got a lot of responses. And even more impressive, Stack Overflow didn't have a problem with the asking of the question. You almost always have something around here that says duplicate, irrelevant, bullshit question, we hate you, go somewhere else, we are not taking questions anymore. Or, we haven't been taking questions since 2009. Okay, I know that it is common in C++ directories to place header files in a directory such as include and implementation in a directory like source. I've been toying with different project structures and I'm wondering whether there are any objective reasons for this or is it simply convention. This might explain it a bit. Tony Buck says this takes us back to 2010 again. Oh no, this is some Python guy, even a year earlier. Or maybe this. See, it's not legal on Stack Overflow to answer a question with a single link. So what they do as a cop-out is post their single link on the comments instead. I once had 3 places for a math library project: source for the .c, include for the internal .h, and API for the .h meant for outside use. Weird. Even tried distinguishing the public-facing API headers by naming them .api, but that confused the tool chain. Yeah, it would. Most of the time, with effective abstraction, you only care about the interface and want to have it easy just looking at the headers. Bad sentence structure. It's not the only reason, though. If your project is organized in modules, you most likely have to include some headers in different modules. You want your include directory to be cleaned of other noise files in there. Also, if you plan on redistributing your module, you probably want to hide implementation details, so you will only supply headers and binaries. And distributing headers from a single folder with nothing else in it is simpler. There's also an alternative which I actually prefer. Public headers go in a separate file, and private headers and implementation files are separate. We've seen that before. It keeps your folder structure cleaner. Headers and source files are distinctly different and are used for different things, so it makes sense to separate them. From this point of view, the question is basically the same as why do source files and documentation go in different folders? The computer is highly agnostic about what you put in folders and what you don't. Folders are, for the most part, just a handy abstraction because of the way that we humans parse, store, and recall information. There's also the fact that header files remain useful even after you've built. If you're building a library and someone wants to use that library, they'll need the header files, not the source files. So it makes bundling those header files easier, grabbing the stuff in bin and the stuff in include, and not having to sift through source much easier. That is one thing. So when I make these, let's just run init.h to be sure. What that does is it goes into each of my folders, debug, release, and at least I think it's just those 2. All right. That's what I want. Debug, release, and test. Okay. I actually use test. I need a better name for it because it's getting confused with unit tests. But I use test as a directory that the only compilation option or compilation flags for GCC or CLang is standard C++. Equals C 11. W suppresses all the warnings, so it shuts up. And 03, so it runs fast as hell. And that may or may not be better than 02, but err on the side of just make it faster. And it's used just for testing your logic and making it run and shutting up, as opposed to debug, which makes I want to know everything that might be wrong about it. And release, which is let me know what's wrong about it, but I also need it to go fast. Anyway, I need a better name for it. So let's go to debug. So we've run CMake with the build type as debug. So it should have all the warnings and everything, pedantic and blah, blah, blah. And we'll make everything again. Okay, so it's already built everything, but I just want to be sure and I'll pass the .b option, and that forces it to compile everything. Okay, our list, and if we run that, those are our unit tests, and if we run simulation with 1,000 hands of blackjack with one card in the chute. What do you call those things? Awful query, but the shoe. And there we go. Okay, with one deck in the shoe. Seems to be running fine. That's about what you'd expect. And given our strategy in the choice implementation, how it chooses what decision to make given a certain hand of cards, it shouldn't change regardless of how many decks are in the shoe. Let's see, it's about the same. So, okay. See, I have the lib game mechanics. Do it, but see, I have that not ending up in a bin folder. Maybe I should have a bin folder in these. I don't know. Look at some other C++ projects. I don't even know what a good reference point is. Oh god, I don't need any of these. Here we go. Bjorn Substrip has a, I think that's how you say his name. Straustrup. Funny. Let's find something I recognize. Autodesk, I recognize that, but I can't look at that software. Facebook, of course. GCC. Chromium is written in it. I'll put that in the back of my mind. Firefox. It's another one. It's got browsers so far. It's a lot of programming types I'm not familiar with, though. The Tomb 3 engine, maybe? And KDE. Let's look at Chromium. Shoot.